Hello friend, welcome back. This video includes Tim Holtz Paper Dolls and how I have altered 18 of these. This video is going to go fairly quickly. I will be linking all the products that I use in the video description, and I have a blog post over on my blog that I will link up for you. I am starting with my Posca pens, paint pens. There are different varieties of paint pens, obviously, but Poscas are amazing and the colors are vivid and bright. They do need a little bit of drying time, but I love the way this paper doll turned out, and I've actually already used this in a project in my art journal. These are so fun to experiment with and add some funky little elements. They're really easy to use and pretty forgiving. This second paper doll is going to include paper scraps, and I have a huge stash of old scrapbook paper as well as newer pattern paper that I've purchased. I tried not to overthink what I was doing here. I just picked one of the paper dolls where she was holding some accessories. This one, she was holding a parasol, so I decided to take this pattern paper and fashion my own overlay so that really accentuated her parasol. I made the little circle behind her to kind of make her face stand out, her head, her hat. I loved the details of her hat. And then I made her some little shoes and other accessories, and I'm a sucker for a polka dot, so I thought this turned out really cute. I am using Scotch Create permanent glue stick to hold on this paper and in many of these other demonstrations that I do in this video. I'm very pleased with this glue stick. Highly recommend. In these next couple of demonstrations, I am going to show you how I attached some different fabric to these paper dolls. As any good crafter, I have a nice stash of vintage fabrics, laces, and other trimmings. And here I am just going to use a little bit of Fabri-Tac, which is a really good fabric glue, to hold this piece of tulle fabric that I had in my stash and this little trimming of crochet. Working with this Fabri-Tac takes a little bit of patience, but it does hold very well once it's dry. I also decided to get the glitter out. Now, I know some people do not like glitter, but I am not one of those people. I love glitter, and I thought she could use some ruby red slippers, only pink. This particular paper doll, the lady was sitting, and so I just cut off most of the bottom part of her body and used this bold fabric to make a long skirt. I wanted her to appear taller, so I did a very similar method to the previous paper doll and just used the Fabri-Tac, glued a little hem, hand gathered and wrapped around. I will tell you, this video cut off on me, so you don't see the entire thing, but I did add a fascinator to her, and I think she looks like she could be part of the royal family. Very regal indeed. I pulled out my stash of sequins for this next paper doll, And this guy had a double row of buttons on his jacket, so I decided to use the sequins to cover the buttons. With my Eileen's tacky glue, I used a little straight pin to add the glue precisely where I wanted it, and then I used that same little pin to pick up the sequin and add it to the paper doll. That's just a really easy way to do that. And of course I added sequins on some other areas, and I really like the way he turned out. He's fun. This next paper doll utilizes one of my favorite things to do in an art journal, and that is collage. And as any proper paper crafter knows, you do not throw away any scrap paper. So I have plenty, and I just went to town on my little stash of small bits and collaged using matte medium gel and a little palette knife, and I really had fun with this one. My other matte medium is by Liquitex, and I would recommend Liquitex or Golden in these mediums. However, I picked this up at Hobby Lobby. It is the Master's Touch brand, and I must say it actually has worked really well. I just decided to experiment with it with my composition notebook journal, and I've got to say it has worked really well for me. Collaging in this way is so relaxing and meditative for me. If you are looking for a paper craft that does not require a lot of thought or, quite frankly, a whole lot of composition knowledge or talent, just pick up some scrap paper and start collaging. This is just so fun to do and so easy, and you can really come up with some beautiful patterns and make some really cool pieces without a whole lot of effort. And of course I decided she needed some type of a little headpiece, and it really completed her whole look, in my opinion. This next demonstration is kind of the same, but different. It is collage, but on this one I used some tissue paper. And this piece of tissue with the gold metallic polka dots was in a pack that I picked up at TJ Maxx last year. It had several different white tissues with metallic dots and stripes, and I have used the heck out of it. I love that tissue paper. The other tissue paper that you see me using is just a white tissue that I did some jelly printing on with acrylic paints. And if you have not gotten into jelly printing, I'm going to apologize now, because once you start with a jelly press on tissue paper or vintage paper or other paper, you will soon have a new obsession, let me just say. With the next paper doll, I decided to get my stash of stencils out and some acrylic paint. And honestly, there are so many possibilities for using acrylic paint on these paper dolls, and stencils is just one way. These little stencils were in a pack that I purchased at Target several years ago. Not sure if they still have them or not. I think they're called Mondo, perhaps. It's a brand that Target carries. I had actually bought one of these for my granddaughter and picked up one for myself as well. And I've actually used it quite a bit. These fun little icon looking stencils are fun to use, and they were perfect for the paper doll. Used some fluorescent pink and chartreuse and white, and I think she's cute. I also came back in with my trusty old Uniball Signo white gel pen and outlined the stencil once those were dry. This particular white Uniball pen came in a pack of 3, and it had a metallic silver and a metallic gold, and I will use the metallic silver in a later demo. In these next 3 demonstrations, I am going to use a sanding block on 3 different paper dolls and then alter them from there. This is a really cool way to grunge up these paper dolls. These paper dolls do have, they're kind of a lightweight cardstock, but they do have a finish on top, and the sanding block will take that finish off and really make it look almost like an old black and white photo. I really love the way this looks. To give it some aged look and a little bit of bite, so a medium will kind of sink in and stick to it. One piece of advice that I will give on sanding these paper dolls is to vary the direction that you're sanding. Don't just sand in one direction. You want it to have some variance and randomness in the grunged look. And I also find that folding them a little bit and sanding them adds some interesting character. So I pulled out my trusty Distress ink, also from Tim Holtz Ranger ink, and used my little ink dauber to ink the edges of one of these sanded paper dolls, and it almost looks like a sepia photo. I left the larger paper doll as is with the black and white, just sanded, and this little girl, I pulled out my Jane Davenport watercolors and added some water to her and just kind of varied the colors. Added color, dabbed it off, added color, dabbed it off, until I liked the result. And again, there's so much you could do with watercolors on these paper dolls. I ended up pulling out my neutral, I think this is the neutral palette from Jane Davenport. I wanted to use some of the skin tone colors on her along with the bright palette. Altering these Tim Holtz paper dolls is a great way to destash if you are a craft hoarder like I am. These are a collection of paper flowers and other artificial silk flowers that I've had for years from my scrapbooking days, and I thought these would be fun to use on the paper dolls. And honestly, I've got more than I even realized whenever I pulled all of these out and put them together. I thought they were just the right amount of over the top on the paper dolls to make a statement. I really like this one. Some of these paper flowers had a adhesive backing on them, but I did add a little bit of Fabri-Tac glue just to hold them in. And again, from my scrapbooking stash of embellishments, I have tons of paper brads, and these they were a little felt heart paper brad that I've had for ages. I cannot even remember the brand. I love these with the paper dolls. And then I used some of my found words from my book pages, and I think this one says wild, and this is probably one of my favorite ones, and it was the easiest and simplest to do. Staying on the theme of found words, I wanted to add to one of these paper dolls some quotes or words of some kind, and so I got into my stash of book page found words that I cut out of book pages and keep in a little container to use in my art journal. And this one had something about wearing glasses, and so I thought it would be fun to add some kind of big funky silver glasses to her and add the quote. And she is super cute. I love the way she turned out, and this is the silver Uniball Signo gel pen that I was talking about earlier in the video that came in a set with the white and then a gold pen. For this next altered paper doll, it may look a little more complicated than it really is or should be. I wanted to hand stitch on one of these paper dolls, so I pulled out some embroidery thread. I've been in a fluorescent mode lately, so I had this pack of fluorescent embroidery thread, and I thought it would make a really nice contrast on the black and white paper doll. So I just took one of my large needles, and that is a book block there underneath me, and I used that to pierce the paper doll before I ever sewed it. Just to make it easier to sew, I punched in a pattern. This is kind of a cross stitch pattern, this first one, and then I just did some straight stitches, some satin stitches, and added different colors to this guy. And again, I really like the way this turned out, but it's really not complicated at all to sew on these. Just use your imagination and a needle and thread and some glue to keep it all in place when you're done. Another way to add interest to these paper dolls is to combine some of these methods. So for example, when I'm doing the hand stitching, I could take some pieces of vintage fabric or buttons or sequins or anything and hand sew them to the paper dolls. For this video, I wanted to try to keep it as simple as possible and demonstrate, one or two methods at once instead of overwhelm. But these things could definitely be combined and really do some cool stuff with these. So for this demonstration, again, as with any proper paper crafter, I have quite a collection of washi tape. Most all of the tape that I'm using in this video is from Wow Studio, and it's all black and white. I decided just to stick with black and white patterns and really love the way this guy turned out. One of those rolls of tape has punctuation marks, and so I strategically added those, and I really like the graphic nature of him. On these last two paper dolls, I drug out my sewing machine. On this first one, I am just simply sewing him to a piece of painted underpaper from my craft table. Very random. And on the second paper doll, I pulled out a scrap piece of muslin fabric and used just a little bit of tape runner to hold her on, and sewed around, cut around the silhouette of her shape and frayed the edges somewhat, and then I went back in and sewed around and around, and I really like the way she turned out. I really hope this has gotten your creative wheels spinning. Let me know what you do with your Tim Holtz paper dolls.